welcome. My name is Liz, and this channel, The Greenockian, is all about stories from local history of Greenock and Port Glasgow. This week's story takes us back to 1903 when a Jack the Ripper copycat was stalking the streets of Greenock. Jack the Ripper was the name given to a notorious killer. In 1888, he terrorised the mean streets of Whitechapel in London, committing horrible assaults on women, mostly prostitutes. It is known that he killed at least 5 women, horribly mutilating their bodies. Jack the Ripper was never caught, and to this day people still speculate on who he may have been. His killing made news and led to many copycat attacks throughout the world. Greenock was no exception. Greenock, in 1903, was a busy port and industrial centre. The main streets in the town were Cathcart Street and Hamilton Street, which housed many banks, hotels and shops. However, from these main streets ran many small alleyways or closes, which led down to the quays and docks on the River Clyde. The town, with its docks, shipyards and sugar refineries, was a magnet for those seeking employment, and many flocked here. Unfortunately, there was not enough housing. Overcrowding was a persistent problem, with many large families living in one room. The cheap lodgings and drinking dens in this area attracted the many sailors who arrived after a long voyage and had money to. There were plenty of people in the closes who took advantage of that. During the 1880s and 90s, work had been undertaken to improve conditions in the town, doing away with many of the more insanitary lanes and alleyways. But being a busy port, there were still areas of the town that catered to the needs of itinerant workers and sailors. Late on Saturday, 7th of March 1903, a woman made her way to Greenock Police Office in Dalrymple Street. She was bleeding heavily and reported that she had been stabbed by a man while in an empty building in a close, just yards from the police office. Her name was Elizabeth O'Neill, 41 years old, and known to the police as a woman who frequented the illegal drinking dens in that part of Greenock. Her injuries, which the local press delicately described as being to the lower part of her body, were severe, and she was rushed to Greenock Infirmary. That same night, just an hour and a half later at 1 a.m, Bridget Baker appeared at the police office. She too was bleeding profusely. Bridget reported that she had been stabbed by a man in a close in the Venel, just across the public library, very near the police office. She was 52 years old and also well known to police. She had been cut by a knife and had a 7-inch gash in her groin area. She too was immediately rushed to the infirmary to have her wound treated. Both women described a very similar attacker. The description was he was between 20 and 30 years of age, tall and respectably dressed, and not drunk. The police set out to try and find the attacker, but without success. Fortunately, both women survived the attacks and were discharged from the infirmary a week or so later, having been successfully treated for their injuries. The attacks led to lurid press headlines: Greenock Ripper crimes and Rippers in Greenock. One reported that the women were, quote, accosted in the street on Saturday night by a respectably dressed man of between 20 and 30 years of age. They were induced to accompany him to obscure courts in a low part of town and then stabbed, unquote. Stabbed, unquote. As mentioned, both Ripper victims were known to the police. The first, Elizabeth O'Neill, was from Glasgow and had been in trouble with the police since arriving in Greenock around 1892, mostly for petty crimes such as theft, drunkenness, and seems to have left the town shortly after the assault. The second victim, Bridget Baker, was quite a character. Since 1868, She had frequently been in trouble, appearing in the local police court charged with various petty crimes: breach of the peace, tuning, theft, perjury, drunk and disorderly, assault, etc. In 1877, she had even been charged with the theft of a petticoat from the local prison. She actually continued to get into trouble even after being stabbed. She died in the poorhouse at Smithton, Greenock, in 1911. It is interesting to note that the offences were reported to have been carried out by someone described as, quote, young and well dressed, unquote, and that they took place not in the heart of the Venno, but like Dalrymple Street and near the library at Wallace Place, both only yards from the police office. Perhaps the perpetrator was worried that he would look out of place deeper in the closes and alleys. Greenock Police Office was at that time in Dalrymple Street. Very close attacks took place. The police court was also in that area. In March 1903, a typical Monday morning session of Greenock Police Court would deal with various crimes: drunk and incapable, breach of the peace, loitering, assault, using obscene language, and theft. Most of these crimes committed in the central part of the town. The man who stabbed the two women could have been just passing through and perhaps left the town on one of the many ships that sailed the next morning. Ships leaving the Clyde just days after the attack were headed all over the world: Valencia, Bombay, St. John in New Brunswick, Bordeaux, Lisbon, many via Liverpool. The chances of getting away from the area were many and varied. The Greenock Ripper did not strike again after his one-night spree, 1903. No arrests were ever made, and no one came forward with any information about the culprit. The identity of the Greenock Ripper remained a mystery. Thank you for listening. For more information about Inverclyde's history, then please check out the Greenockian blog at www.thegreenokian.blogspot.com. Thank you.